thing from your perspective in terms of high fidelity prototyping, etc.?
So I just think what you covered was great there, Cameron. I think for me, I think the reality is that it's going to be a mixed experience going forward for the foreseeable future. When we're even out of lockdown, I think this is just going to be the status quo for a long time. So I think we have to be able to offer a solution that shifts and offers both physical touch points as well as kind of high fidelity digital touch points. Because I think, even after this ends, a lot of people are still going to be, suffering from kind of post-COVID PTSD, if you will, and wanting to stay home for safety and security and so forth. So I think I appreciate the offers, and I learned quite a bit about some of the solutions that you offered there that I wasn't familiar with myself. So I think it's really just about how do we take our current solutions, our current programs, and adapt them to this. And I think that's the first step. And then we can start kind of adding more and more cool technology on top of that once we start getting comfortable. Because one thing that we're not going to be able to get away from is that there's a certain level of kind of consumer education that has to happen, over and beyond Zoom. How do we all integrate? How do we log into this? How do we experience it? So I think we can't just go too far with tech. I think we still have to go with people and just understand the consumers and where they are from a technical understanding, and then we can grow that.
Well, Shami, before you go, I see there's a question here from Nadia. In your opinion, how do you shift culture, i.e. innovation, where previously people don't share because of intellectual property and non-recognition? I'm sure you face that on the daily.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's how we have to just structure our business. I think incentives is super key. FNB has become one of the most innovative banks is because they've opened the door and said anyone in the business, from the teller all the way up to senior exco, should offer ideas. And some of the biggest solutions that they have, from business banking to the CIPC integration, have come from staff that normally wouldn't have been able to offer that. So I think that's what we've seen it locally, is that incentivizing it. And saying, hey guys, we're all on board here. And I think it's creating a culture of a team instead of a kind of like a me and that's mine. And then when it does happen, is you give people the value. It doesn't need to turn into a please call me situation. If someone gives some good value, there's opportunity there to just say, hey, thank you for that. But I think it's really the step of saying, hey, we're all in here to kind of grow the business and incentivize one another to do so. So I think that's the first step, is just getting everybody contributing and then giving them value when doing so.
Brilliant answer. And I think that Please Call Me service is probably one of the best examples of that. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I see a lot of comments coming through. It's more important than ever to figure out how do we keep people's engagement. Alex, do you think you could touch on that for a moment?
Well, I saw a question that quickly popped up now that I just wanted to quickly touch on from Josh, asking about VR headsets and when will they be widely available in people's houses. Now, interesting enough, I was having a chat to somebody from Oculus Rift, and they were saying that the big challenge they have with the VR headsets is access to content, because they did have a lot of people who ended up buying Oculus headsets. You get Oculus Go and Oculus Rift and all these different versions of it. But because there isn't that much content available, it becomes a thing that you sort of own for a week, and after a week, watched every sort of gorilla and whale experience on YouTube that you can, and then that's the end of it. So it really is also a question of what are events in this particular conversation going to bring to the experience for me to go out and say, listen, it's actually worth getting a VR headset. Or is it going to be like the USB stick? I remember when I went to my first event and I got a USB stick, man, this was like a treasured item in my house, because I thought, wow, this is amazing. Like, this is like a stiffy disk on acid. Now I go upstairs, I've got a whole bucket full of USB sticks, because every event I go to, I get a USB stick. So is the VR headset going to be something that PCOs are going to get their clients to send to people as part of their invitation and say, listen, join us on Friday, the 27th of September, when we reveal whatever, and you're going to get your headset with it. And before you know it, a majority of people will have a headset in their house.
Perhaps it could become disposable, like 3D glasses are at a movie cinema, right? I mean, it could get to that point.
Very much so. I mean, I think you've already got Google, who does sort of like a DIY virtual headset. And I mean, once again, it's one of those things that if you slightly well-heeled or you've got a bit of extra cash to splash out on, you might have a gold-plated VR headset. You might have something that's customized to your eyes in terms of, whatever the optometrist suggests. So it's all possible.
I see there's already a comment here. There are disposable VR goggles or glasses that you can make or buy. So that's very interesting. And the other interesting point that I potentially want to talk about from an augmented reality is we all carry a device in our pocket that can be used for augmented reality. And I find that to be very, very impressive, because things like Zapper, it's not Zapper, the financial institution's app. It's another one in the shape of an augmented reality app. Do you want to touch on augmented reality from that perspective? Because we have that device already in our pocket. That's already accessible to all of us to use at our event.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of augmented reality, I don't know if it's going to necessarily help us much in terms of distancing. Once again, if it's something that we're sitting at home and we can overlay some sort of information, once again, it boils down to the creativity of the organizer. Because if you look at augmented reality, it's also been around for a long time. I mean, we had people running around town looking for Pokemons a couple of years back, and that became a bit of a fad. But once again, until there's sort of seriously good content and something that is well executed, it becomes one of those technologies that's there. It's like the mini disc. Like, it was there and it kind of did something, but it never really went anywhere because there wasn't sort of a critical mass. And I think, once again, to maybe emphasize the fact that even though it feels like it's a space of doom and gloom and uncertainty into the future, I think it's such a prime opportunity to be shaping a lot of this new technology and kind of taking ownership of it and kind of driving it. Because the fact of the matter is that we're going to get there eventually at some point. I mean, it's just a matter of time now. And whilst we're all sitting at home and we're busy trying to ponder as to how to move things forward, this is a really good one to start working on.
And maybe, Mushambi, I can just ask you a real question based on what I read in the comments. And thank you for that, Alex. Human interaction is super important for a presenter, right? How do you as a presenter manage that? How do you keep people enthralled with what you have to say? How do you keep the body language, even though virtually, in tune? Surely it's a struggle.
Yeah, it is a lot different, because particularly as a speaker, I feed off of the energy of the room. And being able to look people in the face and have some eye contact. It's a little bit difficult here to do so. But I think that's why we have to shift. Is now, it's very different than when I'm delivering a keynote on stage in front of 500, 1,000 people or more. Is now I've got the opportunity to get those Q&As and that engagement in the middle of me speaking, instead of waiting until kind of the very end to Q&As. We can kind of transform the way we deliver. That's a little bit more conversational than lecturing. And for me, I think that's one of the things that I've been looking forward to, and that's been happening in some of the engagements that I've been happening, is that, now we're able to talk a little bit more back and forth than I normally would be able to on a bigger stage. And I think that's where we as speakers just have to shift. And I think then from an organizer standpoint, is we just have to know is that how can we push those kind of touch points and remind people to engage here with not just the thumbs up, but the questions and the polling like you started with at the beginning. And then that has an opportunity for me to change my content even as I'm presenting, because I can base it off of the poll and the insights shared. So I think it's just a more interactive way of delivering, and it's a new challenge, but I think there's an opportunity for more engagement.
Yeah, and I think that's super important. Sorry, Alex, before we come to you, is that we need to potentially learn something from this and maybe use Mentimeter in a better way in a live event or a hybrid event, because the interaction of the chat room, can you imagine having all of that interaction on your phone while being on stage, or an iPad or your comfort monitor? Being able to see that, see what's coming through, see how people are resonating with your content, and then be agile enough in the moment to pivot and go a different direction. I think that's where it is, right, Alex?
Yeah, look, I mean, one of the other conversations Mushambi and I had offline before we jumped onto this call was also the big challenge of showing value to sponsors. So if you're organizing events that have a sponsor element to it, or that have third parties that are looking to kind of leverage the event. How do you start monetizing, or how do you start measuring that value when you're online? Because there's no agenda, there's no banner, there's no all the traditional things. There's no sponsoring the coffee station because most people would bring their own coffee to this meeting. So how do you start creating that value? And how does it mean that these kind of digital events are sold at a different price point, are promoted at a different price point? Could they potentially come in at the same value because there's other things that you can replace those sponsorship and those touch point opportunities with? Look, and I see a lot of people also in the chat room are saying, nothing replaces human interaction. And I completely agree with you. I mean, there is something about face-to-face time, even when you have meetings with people, versus Skype, that is invaluable. The question is just if restrictions continue, if people continue to be cautious about interacting with too many people or going to big events. I mean, I don't know if we'll see 90,000 seater concerts at F&B Stadium again. We might have to have restrictions in terms of how many people can be in a venue. Then you have to start thinking about how you're going to manage that and how you're going to deal with that.
I think that's a question everyone's probably asking themselves. And I see a couple of comments coming through, specifically around the RSVP. Another thing to think about is a time for facial recognition. I mean, Alex would be the perfect person to answer that. Or is there a way we can do a lot of these? In terms of in customer experience, you look at touch points. And at an event, you'd also look at touch points, right? So what touch points at an event do you see falling away? And I think a buffet, please make sure a buffet falls apart, because I don't necessarily like buffet food, but I get it from a catering perspective. Does that make catering more difficult now at events?
Totally. I mean, just think about the double dippers. I mean, those people who stick a sausage or a halloumi stick into the sauce and then they go back again for another one. I mean, now if you think about it in the world we live in, I mean, it's horrific. It freaks me out completely. But these are the things you have to think about. I mean, like you said, like registration, is it just going to be swiping a ring or swiping a watch that already has your registration on it and it just identifies you? Physical programs, I mean, have already gone out the window. We've already moved a lot of things onto people's devices to be able to manage that. Are we going to ask people to come pre-fed? I don't know. But food might be a different kind of experience. And once again, we get into the whole environmental conversation. Are single-use not necessarily plastics, but single-use instruments and things going to come back again to ensure that there's a sort of hygiene element to it? I mean, I don't want to necessarily think that we're going to go into a clinical space, but I think more and more people are going to be conscious. And maybe, it's also going to be a question of the luxury element of it as well. So if you're looking at a massive conference for one of the bigger institutions, are your VIP guests going to be hesitant to have to interact with big groups of people? So that's maybe where your fusion kind of event comes in, where those VIPs will probably fill the room of 20 with the presenter and the panel discussion, and the rest gets broadcast to the wider 2,000, 5,000 attendees that will be watching it from their desks or watching it from home.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect use case for the hybrid or fusion events, as you mentioned there, Alex. I'd like to go into the audience quickly and ask Tebogo quickly, please unmute yourself to explain what you mean by these Mandela notes. I haven't heard of them before, so perhaps you can elaborate.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if you guys are aware, most of us are carrying some sort of a South African note from a 10 Rand right through to the 200 Rand note. And on I think a few years ago, there was a big hype that the South African Reserve Bank made about the new note that was being published. I don't know if you guys are aware. So there are two types of notes out there. There's the ones with the animal print on it. I think you'll see they all have Mandela on one side, but then on the other side, there's a note which has got the Mandela face, which is the new notes. And then there's the ones which are the older notes, which have got the animal on it. So the ones that you want is the one with the Mandela face on both sides of the note. And what happens is then there's an app, the Reserve Bank app. So there are two apps that the Reserve Bank has, obviously, but the one that you want is the one with the big R on it, which says the SARB currency app. And so when you open that, the note comes to life. It literally comes to life. So what it has is that it's got historical facts so each note has got different historical facts about the different places that Mandela was at. The 10 rands may be about his capture site, and then 50 rands is about his house in Soweto, that kind of thing. And then basically what it is like, it literally gives, the person who's got you hold your cell phone and you keep it above the note, and it picks up different facts. So you've got a space where he's talking. Sorry, I've got my son coming in the room now. And then you can learn different things about the apps. You've got different things. Okay, hold on.
Don't worry about it. It's all good. We all have our co-workers with us at home.
Go to your sister. So you've got Mandela speaking. Some of it is his speeches. Some of it is a history about that environment he was in. It's, you can actually watch a video. You can listen to an audio. You can so there's different things that you can learn about it. And what I found is that because when we show that to audiences, people suddenly realize that, but they're holding this, they can actually experience it by themselves in their own spaces. And that gives them an understanding of what augmented reality is all about. It then gives it, it gives it a different meaning and makes it so much more real for everybody. Unfortunately, what I found is that a lot of foreigners have been taking these notes away because they now realize what they're doing, and yet we all have it. So that was just my take on it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And sorry, I just had to put my little background in because the sun's starting to come through and it's going to start burning the background. Thank you for that. I think it's super important to see how we can use augmented reality. And I'm currently studying, and when I use my textbooks, it's a virtual textbook. It's on an ebook central site, which is like a virtual library. And using that Zapper app that I told you about earlier, ZAPPAR.com, you can use that technology to watch videos within your textbook. And I think using that in your post-event summary and, for example, with all the PDFs that we'll send to you after the session to potentially help you with your sessions planning for your clients, having that Zapper app built into something and having someone like me or a speaker explaining what that infographic or that PDF is about might be invaluable to give context. I see Kelly asked a question. Kelly, potentially, can I come to you? Could you unmute yourself? Could you explain to me what you mean by the flash mobs? I'd like to hear more.
Hi, Cameron. So we recently inquired about entertainment for one of our gala dinners taking place, and we were presented with the concept of flash mobs. So what they do is you have your event or conference going on, and people are listening to information, and then all of a sudden they crash your event or conference. But the only concern I had was how to control the content, because what was presented was, for example, a guy you're busy speaking about something serious, and a guy just comes in and starts singing opera out of nowhere. And that may not necessarily be fascinating to everybody, and some people might find it annoying. So my concern with that was just, how do you control the content of what is being displayed in the flash mobs?
That's a good question. And funnily enough, earlier this year, we actually utilized a very similar flash mob. Kelly, I'm just going to put you on mute real quick. Thanks for that question. With respects to flash mobs, it has to be very well orchestrated, very well curated and planned. And you have to definitely have a dry run. I've heard about these virtual flash mobs where an attendee will just start singing. I'm not sure how it will be received. I'm sure if it's well planned, well put together, and well rehearsed, it's definitely something that could be done in the future. I do know a company that can do this, so I can get them involved. And this leads me to a question that I want to pose on Mentimeter. You would have seen that there's the slide question, but the real question is, should the show go on? What do I mean by that is from USB's side, should we keep on doing these mastermind sessions with you? I see 34 of you have said, yes, please, go ahead, keep doing this. But the real question is, what value are you looking for next? And that's the next question over here that I'd like to hear from you. Good morning. I'd also like a good morning next, I guess. But thanks for the session. AI, virtual reality, mastermind sessions are great. But potentially if you could give a little bit more insight as to what you want to hear about. We've heard a couple of you mention that you'd like to understand what it means to produce one of these events, to facilitate one of these events. So potentially we could see that. Maybe we can bring a flash mob and try it out and see what that looks like in a virtual setting. In closing, I'd like to pop over to Paul, the CEO of USB, for his closing thoughts, and then we'll look for the last couple of questions in the chat and via Mentimeter. So Paul, if I can have you unmute yourself and stand by, just the last call for people to hop into the chat and let us know what you think we should talk about next in the coming sessions.